Carrie Van Overshield, PhD, is a management consultant at Think Consulting. She is an experienced and influential operations leader in education and technology space. With over 20 years of experience and a PhD in organizational psychology, Dr. Van Overshield has directed large-scale operations, developing policies and procedures to uphold compliance standards and facilitate decision-making for long-range strategic initiatives. She's experienced in building and scaling growth teams, managing wide-range projects and programs, instructional design, and migrating systems to create efficiencies. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Carrie Van Overshield.
Oh, thank you. And just to be crystal clear, if you do have a question or address me, please call me Carrie. The only ones I require to call me Dr. Van Overshield are, once in a while my undergraduate students. But no, seriously, Carrie is just perfectly fine. So I know through my conversations with the chapter colleagues today, some of you have been able to receive your Red Pill Executive book, and some of you haven't. So I just want to first go over some framework that we're going to be working with today, so we're all kind of, quote, on the same page on the difference between a red pill and a blue pill organization. Those of you who are just probably might be wondering, where is this red and blue pill coming from? It's coming from The Matrix. There's a scene, the main character, Neil, has the option to take a red pill or a blue pill with pros and cons on both sides. The blue pill is pretty much easy, kind of easygoing, whereas the red pill is something a little bit more challenging. So I'm going to first cover the red pill, and red pill is usually it's organization that's a little less creative. They have kind of a plan A and a plan B. There is no C or D or E or F. There's also, usually you'll see bits and parts of lack of ownership when someone might make a mistake. It is something that isn't really expressed in the organization, or it's just kind of, oh, we're just not going to even talk about it. In addition to that, red pill organizations also have the opportunity they don't have the opportunity to speak out or challenge their leaders. You might see this in various meetings when the leader might make a comment and everyone's agreeing to it. There's no one speaking up. Blue pill, there's also a lot of lack of understanding, not really honing in experience and honing in the capacity to understand a process. And if a process is working, everything is kind of status quo. We don't want to rock the boat. We're going to stay on track, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but there doesn't really lead to any creative opportunities like the red pill. So the red pill organization is more focused in like, where's our strategic alignment? How are we getting from point A to point B? If it's a goal that is, a short-term goal from 2 months to maybe 6 years, there's definitely a plan. These kind of organizations, you will see individuals and groups constantly talking about where they're at and where they want to go. There's also usually an organizational culture shift of, if something changes within their clients or their industry, they're really able to kind of look at that culture and shift with them. They're always looking on how to kind of go the next level, very innovative, seeking kind of potential value, not always focused on budget and scope, but what is the value that we're giving to our industry, that we're giving to our clients, our customers, or whatever, groups of people that they're working with. So that's kind of the difference between a red and blue pill. Now, some of you might be like, wow, my organization or my clients are kind of maybe in the mix. And we're going to actually start breaking that down later in the breakout rooms later in the presentation. So we'll keep on kind of digging in here. Next slide, please. So I do want to just kind of share kind of how I got here. So a lot of my experiences in higher education, over 17 years, believe it or not. I kind of surprise myself when I think about that. With that being said, I've always been in operations, always administrative support to operations, always trying to think, how can I make this process better? How can we be more efficient? And I actually did my thesis on looking at organizations and how they operate and looking at different lenses in organizational psychology theories. And I honestly didn't know the red pill executives. I didn't know Tony or Jeff or Brian at that time. Fast forward, I am getting to the point in my career in higher ed, kind of coming out of it, and I found Think Consulting. And I finally felt like, oh, a group that really gets me. So that's kind of how I became kind of shifting from higher ed for about 17 years. And these past over 2 years, I've been with Think Consulting. So just wanted to kind of share a little bit about kind of how I got here. And so when I started reading the Red Pill Executive, I started really resonating with these case studies on, you know, when they talk about the legal research merger, on how they went in as consultants and they were able to express to the CTO how to use the red pill theories and components, and being able to really shift their thoughts and their knowledge around how to make things better, not just looking at kind of the scope and the budget, but how can we add value to our organization? Of course, there was challenges. They were talking about like how long it actually takes to build relationships with these organizations, and that they're surrounded by blue pill, you know, folks that don't want to do anything different. And it comes to the point that you have to start building those relationships and asking questions on what is going to resonate with you. What are these challenges? So to be honest, like when I was reading the book, it just all kind of became clear on all the work that I've been doing in my career, that I was seeing this without really realizing it. Does anyone else want to share maybe what you kind of came out of chapter 8, if you were able to read it with the case studies? Any kind of like, oh man, here's my light switch that went on. Feel free to drop something in the chat or raise your hand.
I'll go. I thought it was interesting with one of the case studies because it reminded me a little bit of my organization, because I work at a healthcare management company in Riverside Management. And I know that it was like a small mom and pop company that now is actually growing to spread across East, West, and Central states. And I know one of the things that came about was there was an executive that was with the company for a while, and I think the company felt that that individual didn't necessarily may have the appropriate mindset to have the wherewithal to understand enterprise and integrating, and how to take all of these pediatric clinics and kind of how do you get everyone to one platform. So I know recently we just the person ended up leaving, and they brought in a new individual that had the mindset, that had the wherewithal on how to manage an enterprise organization. So now they're utilizing him to find a way to move us forward as we're continuing to grow. So seeing one of those case studies in the Red Pill Executive, it just reminded me of that situation that just occurred, and just what it means to just have the mindset to think about, you know, change is not, you know, going to happen, but just how can we move forward with whatever we're dealing with to make sure we're still being innovative, we're still being communicative, everyone's, you know, on the same page across the board. So I thought that was a really good case study to see when I was reading the chapter.
You make a, I want to just put one comment in there. You make a really good point, because I think sometimes it does make a difference when new leadership comes in. Someone that just has different ideas, fresh eyes, we always hear that term, but it also kind of capitalizes on that, you know, sometimes you got to find the right fit within organizations too. And I know that's sometimes hard to establish, and, you know, it's been studied for umpteen years, but trying to find the folks that are resonating with the idea of we can be innovative, we can make a difference and make changes for the best, and not just kind of sitting in status quo. Absolutely. Well, thank you. Anyone else have any, thoughts that kind of was expressed during your reading of the case studies?
Hi, Carrie. This is Mary.
Hey, Mary.
Several years ago, I was part of an organizational change where we took over the IT department of another company. And we actually did have a PMO with an organizational change leader who came in to talk to the team. But it was interesting to see how things went along she talked about the value of change and why we need to change. But I also found some that would say, yes, we're all for this. And then in actuality, they just went back to their old routine.
Yep. That is status quo, right, Mary?
Correct.
We want to say that, yes, we want to change, but, you know, actions speak louder than words. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Mary. All right, let's go to the, oh, sorry, Grace, go ahead.
I think for me, the problem has been less, making the change and more being responsible about making it. Because in my organization, it's been, here's this new thing that can help us keep pace with what's happening in our field. And then we just keep changing, and nothing ever really gets a chance to stick.
Yes, I have been in one of those organizations also. Like, if you haven't really felt a change in the last 6 months, you start like kind of looking over your shoulder and you're like, what's next? That's not a really good feeling, because you have to kind of get into a groove. And, and that's one of the pieces within the book, is that some of these changes take years. And it's actually not a bad thing, because if you start kind of pulling off the band-aids all at the same time, you don't give humans the opportunity to kind of get into a groove of the change itself. Great, thank you. All right, we're going to keep on moving along, because I want to make sure that we've got enough time for everyone to kind of share their thoughts in the breakout room. So we'll go on to the next slide and kind of dig in. All right, so on the right hand side of the slide, I want to just kind of go over the BKO, the bare knuckle. So some of you, of course, once again, if you've been able to read the book, there's kind of 5 principles of BKO. So you got the opportunity. Organizations are constantly looking for improvement, opportunity to grow. Sometimes it is an opportunity from a sales standpoint. Maybe it's a growth of investment, maybe a growth of software systems. So it's different kinds of BKO, sorry, bare knuckle organizations. So the ownership, and then ownership. So things will go south, people will mess up. That's okay. But having the opportunity to step back and say, yep, this is mine, this is where I messed up, and I'm going to own that mistake. And I will be completely honest, I just did that actually last week. I was working with a client. I missed a step on a financial budget approval. And I just simply went to the financial analyst and said, hey, we missed the step as a group. We need to get in front of the work group and make the adjustment, get this approved, and keep going. And how she had the opportunity to stop and be like, oh, Yep. Thank you for coming forward and just saying, hey, we missed this. And we worked together as a team and kept on going. I didn't lose my head. I owned that I messed up, and then we kept on going as a team. So, just kind of a quick little example of how ownership works within the BKO. Flexible. Kind of already touched on this, but ultimately you're in an area that you're constantly evaluating, the culture norms, but also trying to figure out the dynamics within that organization. But once you recognize that, understand that it can be fluid, and that, yes, some of us, of course, work with a lot of projects. You've got kind of your scope. This is what needs to get done. But being flexible enough to go, oh, but if we don't do this, it's not going to work financially. So making sure that, you're also flexible within that scope to the best of your ability. We also know that scope is sometimes money, and that's also important to understand. Tested and grounded in real life. I want to kind of put those not necessarily together, but making sure that with all these different components, the red pill executive, BKO is one thing that I really resonated with, is because it wasn't just saying, this is what we're going to do, documented, but we're actually going to put it into work, and we're going to evaluate it as we go, making sure that it's actually something that we can do in reality. How many times have we read documents after documents or textbooks, and they tell you this is how to do it, but when you get to the real world, it actually doesn't work. So this is something that I've always actually, when I was teaching in higher ed with my undergraduate students, I would always get after them and put the textbook away and be like, okay, translate that terminology into the real world. And I think the BKO really does that, because making sure that it's grounded in real work that we do each and every day. So that's the BKO. The other piece that we're going to be going into that is capitalized within Chapter 8 is the organizational evaluation. So I'm going to go over these quickly so we can get into the groups and be able to kind of flush these out together.
Carrie,
Yes.
I'm sorry, not to break you up. Can I ask, is everyone seeing the presentation, PowerPoint presentation slides? Okay, so if you're not able to see the slides, just make sure you have your gallery view or your setting for view set up correctly, but I just wanted to make sure you guys are seeing the presentation. Sorry about that, Carrie.
Absolutely, no problem. I'm flexible, right? So good job. Thanks for letting me segue into that. So with the organized evaluation, that's what we're going to kind of dig into, use the workbook today, and having a very like-mind capability today, as we've got 40 folks here to share what you are feeling in your organization, being able to identify, oh, we really do a good job doing this, but we're falling short here. And that's kind of literally what I've been doing majority of my career, not only from a professional standpoint, but also my education. Being able to look at organizations with multiple lenses and kind of stepping back. And I think that's probably the hardest thing to do when you're very passionate about the work that you're doing, you're enjoying your job, or you might not be enjoying your job, who knows? But being able to kind of step back and evaluate. So looking at the current structure, is it effective, ineffective? Looking at the examples, taking a deep look, maybe talking to your colleagues and saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is something that really works. Are you seeing the same thing? Kind of check in with each other. Cultural change. Where are you at in the spectrum? Are you, process and policy driven, or more entrepreneurship, like saying, oh, we can make things different. We can go after and change different policies or procedures. Like, where are you at in the spectrum? Operational behaviors. Now, this is where the complete psychologist nerd comes out on me. So operationally, watch people's behavior. You know, when you sit down with your supervisor and you've got, quote, your job description, do you actually know what is expected within your job? What is tolerated in meetings? Is yelling tolerated? Is sticking up for yourself tolerated? Or is it not? Also, just kind of watching behaviors on how people interact with each other. That is probably the toughest one, because you kind of have to step out and look at it more of a neutral ground. And that's really, really rough. Rewards. Rewards is a fascinating little one, because looking at your organization, how are people rewarded when they do a really good job? Is there promotions? Is there salary increases? Benefit increases? How are people actually motivated when it comes to different kind of rewards? And one of the things that I've learned, probably took me a lot longer to learn in my years, is every person is motivated a little differently. So kind of watching how people are motivated and how is the organization rewarding when people do really good work. The fifth one, we probably might not really get into too deep this evening, because that's really more, once we got 1, 2, 3, and 4 kind of shifted and we've evaluated that. Number 5 is actually moving forward, tracking how this is actually changing in your organization. And sometimes you just see glimpses. It might be a glimpse of you're in a large meeting and a leader wants to learn more about something. When you see those little glimpses of that red pill, it's coming around. So with that being said, I'm happy to take questions, but I think let's dig into the breakout rooms at this point.
Carrie?
Does everyone have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
I have a question. Hey, Carrie, my name is Lewis. Can you hear me?
Yes, Lewis. Hi.
Hi. So I have a question for you regarding cultural change. And you talked about the spectrum between process-driven, I guess, on one end, and entrepreneurship on the other end. My experience has been that process-driven organizations, those organizations that have been most defined by established and defined processes, are actually more dynamic and more adaptable to change, because they know their processes, they know what exists, they know what they can do, they know what's out there. And those that are less process-driven are more confused and more unaware of their processes, and they're usually more scared of dealing with change. So they sort of sit on their hands. They sit back and don't rock the boat, because they don't know if they know what the process truly is. But that's my interpretation of this. I think you portrayed this a little differently, and the connotation of your description was different than mine. I'm just wondering how you would describe, or how you would react to the way I described my interpretation of process-driven versus what I think you described. So I just want to be able to get that the definitions correctly and not get stuck with the wording.
Absolutely. I know we're going to shift into breakout rooms in like 1 second. So I'm going to write this question down, and then when we come back to QA, I will give you some more thoughts about that, but I'll let folks go through. I don't want to mess up this technology here.
Yes, so I put in the chat the mirror board that we will be using in your groups. Each room will have a facilitator that will guide you through the activity. If you're in group 1, you'll be doing questions 1, 3, and 5, so the odd numbers. If you're in group 2, you're going to be doing 1, 2, and 4. And if you're in group 3, you'll be doing 1, 3, and 5. Okay.
Thank you. Ultimately, when we were talking about cultural change from process-driven versus entrepreneurial, kind of that scale, And with that being said, Louis, I actually want to kind of challenge you on that because yes, the words are important, but what you described, you guys are actually very process driven, but it seems like you're very flexible. Am I hearing that correctly? Because I also was in your breakout room and it seems like you guys are really agile, like, hey, there's a need, we're going to shift this way. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, you are. So
Okay.
I've done a lot of, I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt, and I've done a lot of process
Perfect.
reengineering and a lot of process defining, structuring, and launching. And so the more you define business processes, the more it allows you to be entrepreneurial, because the more things are defined and structured so that you can be dynamic within that context. And so what I was struggling with is the word process driven. I think the word process driven really means more like structured or rigid here in the red pill environment. And I was just getting caught up with the word. But that's my thing. I just wanted to make sure I understood it correct.
Yes, structure is probably a better word if you want to say, because yeah, it's just that here's the policy, here's the procedure, we don't go beyond that. And granted, there are industries out there, like one of the examples, like banking, financial, there's regulations that they can't control. That's a little bit different. But there, there's organizations that can change if they choose to. So great question though. Love the insight. And I understand that this is question and answer. If you have questions for me, fantastic. But also at the same time, feel free to share what you have brought back from the breakout rooms. Did you have any haha moments or like, hey, this is really cool? I see the chat going here too.
So basically, I put it in the chat, but my group, we talked about the need to kind of use your team agreements. And from those team agreements, you could develop quality metrics that you could share with your team and constantly reflect on those. And instead of taking punitive measures, if the team doesn't meet those team agreements, we felt that the team might have to do a dance or do something crazy, do something humorous that probably you don't want to do, but it's not punitive. Something that you can remember, we really should stick to that. So that was something that was different. We also said that maybe a PMO could be helpful in terms of strategic alignment and time saving. But it was still important for you to operate as like a red pill leader, so that you can encourage openness.
Great, thank you. I loved the example. I was actually there about, not a punitive way to, call out your colleagues if they're 5 minutes late. In one of my very first jobs, I was a preschool and pre-kindergarten teacher, believe it or not. And so we would have certain meetings, and if anyone was late, the next week, that person had to bring donuts because it was always super early in the morning. So it's always payback if you're late for our meetings. Anyone else want to share some haha moments or questions?
So not for my group, I think we had more people who didn't have a PMO office. So I think the overall assessment was just that not having that PMO, not having the governance, not having the policies, the processes, the workflows, the alignment and communication and the standardization, that it made it really difficult. And as well, I think there was 2 individuals in my group who they technically were that PMO. They were the ones that had to kind of find a way to get all the groups together to collect their data, to make some type of way to make sure everything flows. And me, as knowing, being an organization having that PMO, it's important to have that. So it's interesting that, not a lot of organizations, have that office to be able to manage.
Yeah, and one thing about the organizations that have a PMO, if they're scaled correctly, they work really well. But at the same time, just because you have a PMO doesn't necessarily mean that, quote, the red pill concepts are there either. That's not always the case. I've worked in many organizations that have PMOs and they're nowhere to be found some days.
Carrie, question for you. Do you find that more red pill organizations or organizations that have a red pill culture have PMOs, and those that are blue pill culture have less PMO? In other words, culture is driving the existence of the PMO and maybe its role. Do you find that to be the case in clients that you deal with?
Most of the time, because you come to a consulting firm, usually, as I always remind my colleagues, they don't we're not brought in when it's rainbows and butterflies. We're brought in when things are tough. And most of the time there is not a PMO office. There's not a PMO involved. So that's what we bring in. It also opens up our opportunity to change that culture of, oh, things have to be documented. We have to have a governance. There has to be a change management control. So sometimes it's an opportunity for us to educate an organization on how to get better. Great question.
Okay, we have 2 more minutes to today's session. Does anyone have any additional questions they'd like to ask Carrie before we close?
One of the
No?
observations that came in with group 2 was just the willingness to accept and manage mistakes. You couldn't be afraid of the unknown or screwing up and saying the consequences, oh, if I mess up, I'm going to get fired. You need to be comfortable with trying things new, but at the same time, not being afraid if it doesn't go right, making adjustments and then getting back on track.
Yep, flexibility. We make mistakes, and the more risks that you take, sometimes there's a higher risk level. That's why we have a risk mitigation plan, always. Oh, great. I'll let Kamita wrap up, but feel free to find me on LinkedIn if you have questions or just want to simply connect. I'm always willing to have a quote Zoom coffee date, or just want to exchange ideas, challenges. Happy to do that. Find me on LinkedIn. And thank you for the time. And I'll let the team close this out.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie. Let's all give her up. Yes. So thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope you guys enjoyed the book club series, and we'll be back again, as I mentioned before, in May. Please be on the lookout. There will be a survey that will be sent to you. So we'd love to get your feedback and thoughts on today's session so that we will know how to bring more topics to you guys for future events. And as well as, like I said, your PDUs would be generated and you will be getting a recording hopefully within the next few days. Okay, so everyone have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good evening.
Have a good
Bye,
night.
everyone.
Bye.
Well
Bye,
done.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.